is not speaking the truth a lie. Debatable, arguable. Get on an elevator and somebody says to you, how are you? And it's been the worst day of your life, but I'm going to say, great, how are you? And get off the elevator as fast as I can. We call them white lies, but the line between a white lie and a black lie is very, very blurry.
The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Hello. Thanks everybody for coming. Beautiful, typical night here in Toronto, Canada, Tim. So we have to begin with the fact that America Fantastica is your first novel in 20 years. Mm-hmm. What gives?
Well, I became a father at a pretty old age of 56, and I was determined I'd be a good father. And I couldn't be a good father if I continued, 12, 15-hour days writing stories. And then on my off hours, the characters would inhabit me at the dinner table with my kids and wife and inhabit my dreams. And I just didn't think I could be a decent dad. So I quit cold turkey, pretty much. I stayed, I wrote maybe a little slim short story or two over the next 20 years, but not publishing anything. I spent my time with my children, playing basketball and throwing around footballs and helping them with their homework and all the things that a father should be doing. I had, right prior to quitting, had written maybe between 18 and 25 pages of America Fantastica. And the characters stayed with me for those 20 years, just kind of yapping at me. One bank teller, sort of a diminutive 4'6" redhead named Angie Bing, who is and was a motor mouth. She could not shut up. And for 20 years, she yapped at me. I'm smart, I'm beautiful, I'm a missionary, I'm Pentecostal, I can save your soul, I can save America's soul. Irrepressible voice that just kept talking, sometimes in my dreams. And my anti-hero, a guy named Boyd Halverson, would talk to me in a similar sort of way. Things like, if you think Trump is a liar, I'm a bigger one. I lie about my age, my height, my weight, where I went to school, everything. I haven't told the truth since I was a 12-year-old paper boy. And so when, in the course of these 20 silent years of mine, when COVID hit and when Trump won the 2016 election, Angie and Boyd seemed to join kind of the flow of what I was seeing around me on television as I was wearing my mask at home and trying to avoid, COVID, and watching what was coming out of me of the Fox channel and CNN in the States. It looked like a kind of disease, twin diseases were infecting my country. One was COVID and the other was a disease that psychologists call pseudologica fantastica, which is a long term for compulsive lying. And it seemed to be infecting everything around me. For example, not just politics, but when you'd call a bank or an airline and you'd get a recorded message saying, "We are unusually busy. Please enjoy the flute music." And they're always busy. It's not unusual, it's usual. In fact, it's not usual, it's always. They've recorded it, and it's a patent lie that we've become accustomed to in the States. I don't know if this happens in Canada or not, but I would assume it's across the border. And things like that, and very like the fine print you'll find under an ad, free toaster. And then in the fine print is, all you have to do is, give this bank all your life savings at 0% interest, and you get the toaster. And those kinds of things seemed to, as I got older, ate at me more and more, including the political lies. The COVID is a hoax lie. Remember that one? Or COVID isn't a hoax. It was sent over by the Chinese intentionally. And all the things you'll read in the States, at least, on chat rooms, incredible, ludicrous, preposterous conspiracy theories. All that fed into that silence that this novel was building inside me for those years. So that's a long answer. That's probably my only long answer of the night. That's how the novel began.
Please keep them coming, because I only have like 3 questions on here. So. As a writer of fiction, though, do you feel some affinity with liars, or?
Well, I think we all do, unless we're so saintly as to not be human. I don't think the chipmunks lie, and I don't think that gophers lie. But I think if you're human in your life, at some point you've uttered a lie, if only to yourself. In one sense, lying can be a virtue. When my dad was dying, I didn't say, "Dad, you're dying." I kept my mouth shut, which was a kind of lie, and watched him die. Is not speaking the truth a lie? Debatable, arguable. Get on an elevator and somebody says to you, "How are you?" And it's been the worst day of your life, but I'm going to say, "Great, how are you?" and get off the elevator as fast as I can. We call them white lies, but the line between a white lie and a black lie is very, very blurry. For me, the lies that are dangerous are those that will hurt other people, that will cause damage to or betray a loved one or a friend or a whole country. I won the election, I lost. That kind of lie. The ones that harm others, constitutional democracy, are really dangerous lies. And so that's my answer.
In the novel, as you were just saying, like the contemporary moment seems like a perversion of certain essential or classic American characteristics. The pathological lying seems like in keeping with the self-invention or self-reliance that we associate with the American frontier or something like that. Do you see those qualities, those American qualities of self-invention, as having been corrupt all along, or have they become sort of newly corrupt?
Well, back when I was a soldier in Vietnam, it felt as if I was being lied to daily about things like body counts. We're winning the war in Vietnam. And as soldier after soldier died, it did not feel as if we were winning the war. We would go into a village, search it. Somebody might die. Somebody may lose a leg. And then you'd leave the village, and it would immediately revert to the enemy. It felt as if we were accomplishing nothing. It wasn't akin to World War II, where you were marching across France toward Berlin, or across the Pacific toward Tokyo. There was no sense of destination or purpose to it all. And so it felt that the deceit coming out of not just the White House, but out of Congress and out of the Defense Department, it flew in the face of everything that was before me experientially, what I was witnessing as a soldier there. So I don't think it's new. In fact, I think probably deceit and lying probably as old as Africa or as old as Babylon. The instinct to replace reality with fantasy, what we want to be. Now, there's a good side to that we all have to have fantasies. It's not just dangerous, that the fantasy that tomorrow will be better than today, the belief in it anyway, the hope. Prince Charming will come down the pike someday, if I can just hang in there. The fantasy that I'll live on forever through my books, my children, my good deeds. The fantasy that of almost all religions that there's some form of everlastingness, whether it's samsara in India or nirvana or heaven. There are lots of names for everlastingness, which in at least my experience, it feels as if I've come out of oblivion. I don't remember anything before I was born, and my assumption is I'll return to it. But there's no evidence that maybe I'm totally wrong. So when you make up possibilities for everlastingness, it might be a way of just plodding through life. You need to hold on to some sort of hope. That's the plus side. The bad side, again, is what it can do to others if these things are taken to extreme. If you begin killing people for God, the Crusades and what we're seeing happening now between the warring factions in the Middle East, it's been going on for centuries and centuries. Then it's dangerous. The made-up things that we will use to keep us going can become dangerous.
Throughout the book, the disease of lying spreads across America. And at one point, you advanced the idea that mythomania, as you call it, this pathological lying, stems from an inferiority complex. Can it be said that America is suffering from such a complex these days?
Yeah, I think that there are two levels to it. One, my mind is working partly on the story level. There's a story. This is not a political book. This is a funny book. It's a satire. If you've ever read Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal, a modest proposal is that he makes is that the cure for famine in Ireland is to eat our children. Plenty of protein, packed with vitamins, nice and fresh. It's not, wrapped up like Oscar Mayer, in dyed plastic. He's satirizing other ludicrous proposals for ending. So, but having said that, having written what I think is a funny book, it's meant like serious funny. The way Mark Twain was serious funny near the end of his life when he wrote Letters to the Earth, ticked off about hypocrisy and overblown piety, and then being funny about it, sort of laughing at the devil, which is one response to conspiracy theories and things. They're not rational. You can't talk people out of them. They're beyond reason. So maybe laughter is a kind of response to it. But there's a brokenheartedness in America, a kind of not vicious and not angry, but the broken, the dist and the despairing and the desperate, the hungry, the displaced, the immigrants who aren't accepted or, bottled up. People who get fired and can't get another job, bored housewives, bored husbands. There's a broken-hearted feel that seems so different to me from the 1960s and 1950s that I grew up in, where there was more of a can-do spirit. The world would be better, that Ozzie and Harriet, Happy Days kind of programming that was on television back then was kind of the spirit with which people approached. And one thing that can happen when your heart is broken, as my hero's heart has been broken early in this novel, is you reach for something to replace it, some good thing you can make up about your life and then aspire to. That's the best I can say about my country. It feels like a broken-hearted country. People can't talk to one another, as you've probably been witnessed in our latest shutdown. There's no conversation going on in that country. I remember from high school a quote from Socrates. The object of our discussion is not that your word should triumph over mine, nor that mine should gain the triumph over yours, but that between us we might discover the most perfect truth. Well, the spirit of that quotation doesn't exist in my country. You saw it on television. Neither side wants to talk with the other, wants to try to reach some accommodation, some most perfect truth. Not perfect, most perfect, as close as you, if that spirit's not there. That, I must say, breaks my heart.
When I'm glad you talked about satire, I mentioned it. When people ask me what this book is like, I said it was like a satirical neo-noir or something like that. And as your introduction indicates, obviously you're best known for writing about the Vietnam War. I'm curious, though, rather than spotting the differences between this book and your earlier book, what do you feel are the continuities?
I think they're myriad. I'm an idealist, meaning I want the best for myself, for you, for the world. And something inside me keeps saying it's possible, it can happen. We just hang in there and do our best, try to be decent people. One of the casualties of Vietnam, and one of the casualties of what I'm seeing happening around me in my country now, is the absence of civility, that just plain decency, and I don't see it. Certainly not coming out of the television sets, and certainly not, I live in Austin, Texas, which is sort of the home of Satan these days. It's just not a happy place to be. I have a house on a golf course, and on one side of me is a 80-year-old widow packing a gun who one day blew her brains out as I was typing next across the driveway. Across the street was a lieutenant governor candidate who had children right between, I have children 2 years apart. He had twins in between these kids. And we were sitting having a scotch out on my porch one day, and he reached into his boot and pulled out a gun and said, have you ever seen one like this? And I said, no. It was a really small little thing. And I said, aren't you afraid your children will get a hold of that thing? And he said, no, it has one of these on it. And what it had on it was a twist tie around the trigger, like on bread, where you twist this little piece of plastic. And an infant could take it off. I mean, all you do is pull on it, and it's off. And so I'm sort of going to your question in a backdoor way. When you're surrounded by guns, as this place is, I think there are now more guns in Texas than there are people. That's the last statistic I remember. It might be now that there are double the number of guns than there are people, for all I know, but there are a boatload of guns. Open carry, you can just carry it in the open down there. A killing machine. And so when I was talking about civility in a sense before, it's hard to maintain civility in this armed environment. Everybody around you toting guns and damn proud of it, really proud of it. So I'm sort of mixing brokenheartedness with the absence of civility in the milieu of, I made a line in the book that it's funny, been sort of the opposite of funny, but the Supreme Court has now declared handguns a living human creature, the way we've declared corporations living human beings in the United States. The Supreme Court declared this. So I just took it one step farther. Now guns are living things. Treat them well, feed them, oil them, whatever the hell you do with a gun. Take care of them the way you would your children. there's a sort of sacred quality in Texas to guns. It's beyond bang bang. It's holy. There's a religious believing aspect in gun ownership, as if the Almighty had put in the Bible, "Thou shalt own guns," as one of the commandments.
Does it feel like a risk ever to write about such topical subjects, so rooted in the present moment?
Yeah, it's a risk I had to take, and I'm 77 years old, so my days of being careful are done. That this is almost certainly my last book. I have really bad carpal tunnel in this hand. I could easily drop this and better put it down.
You shouldn't wear white pants when you're doing it.
And there's a frustrating aspect. You're a writer, and you know that making sentences is hard labor. And especially if you try to make a new, original, graceful sentence. Doesn't have to be fancy, but just has an edge to it. Sort of the sentence hits. It's hard to make them, and it's frustrating. And you can sit there all day and write terrible sentences, and then finally you might get a clause, like half a sentence that's promising for the next day. But it is a frustrating, and then there's a subjectivity of what you and I do. That some people love Hemingway, some people think he's macho and terrible. Some people love Ulysses and thinks it's, the greatest novel ever written. Others think it's unreadable. It's a subjective field we're in. So what I kind of like to do is exchange the subjectivity for the objective. That is, become a plumber. And when the leak is fixed, it stops dripping. You can verify. Nobody can say it's still leaking. Or become a golfer where you just count your strokes. And if you shot a 50, you shot a 50. If you shot a, whatever, it's objective. Almost all novelists, painters, playwrights, we're all subject to subjectivity, that you can't please everyone. And if your object, as mine is to give pleasure in a book, that is, entertain you, and you're not entertained, then I've failed. And that can be painful.
I mean, I'm just going to venture that trying to golf with carpal tunnel is probably about as difficult as typing. I mean, that's going to be pretty brutal as well.
It's so frustrating. I can't hit the right letters, so I'm constantly going back.
I mean, that's kind of a metaphor for how it feels normally anyway. You described yourself as an idealist. Was receiving your draft notice the sort of first major pushback against your idealism that you recalled as a young person?
I wasn't that intellectual that would be pushing back against anything. I was a recent college graduate. I just graduated and got the draft notice. So I was 21, I believe, or 22. All I was scared. I had opposed the war in Vietnam. Rang doorbells for Gene McCarthy when he was running for the presidency. Stood in peace vigils at college. I was president of my student body at college, and I used that as a kind of platform to push back against the war. It felt then, and still seems all these decades later, that certain blood was being shed for uncertain reasons. That is, the bodies were for sure. There was no disputing the dead were dead, and the orphans were orphans, and the widows were widows, and nobody could argue about it. But the reasons for the war, as anybody who lived through that era, were highly arguable. Everybody was arguing with everybody about it. A time of great divisions, or in Chicago during the Democratic Convention, hard hats were beating on heads of hippies, and policemen were beating on protesters. So idealism's not the word. I felt I wanted to come here to Canada. I grew up in Minnesota. It would have been about a 7-hour drive. And I'd lie in bed after getting that draft notice in a little town in southern Minnesota, imagining going up to the International Falls, Minnesota, which is right on the Canadian border, and finding a way across some bridge, maybe sneaking across, and I'd have big fantasies in my head. I'm 22 years old. And I'd imagine being chased through the Canadian wilderness by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and dogs barking at me and spotlights on me and huskies coming after me to drag me to jail. Just elaborate fantasies about it. I didn't do it. I eventually kind of surrendered. The day came when I had to get on a bus in my small town and go to a larger town and get inducted into the Army. And I felt like I was sleepwalking, that none of it really felt quite real. It was real, but I have to make myself think it's real. This is real. And then it would feel unreal. I was on with a bunch of guys yelling and kind of adventurous, and a couple of them had beers, on their way to go to Vietnam, sort of celebrating the way a football team might celebrate on the way to, go play the opposition. And I'm sitting there in the back row, just not believing any of it was real. So I surrendered. I guess in a way it was a surrender of idealism in a way, but it felt more like a surrender to gravity, that kind of moral force. Not saying go to war, but saying stuff to myself like, well, I don't want to embarrass my mom and dad. I don't want them sitting around in some cafe in my hometown and hearing one farmer say to the other, did you hear what that Sissy O'Brien kid did? He went to Canada. And then sort of picturing my mom's eyes hitting my dad's eyes as they were to hear comments like that and bouncing away. I couldn't endure the humiliation, both for me and for my family at that age. Would I do it now? I think so, but I'll never know. It's so hypothetical. But back then, I surrendered.
Along with maybe Tomcat in Love, I feel like this might be your most plotted novel. Your Vietnam work really resists narrative convention in any way. In fact, interrogates the very nature of narrativity. But this one is a heist novel, it's a road novel, it's a neo-noir, as I said. It borrows from a lot of different genre conventions. What attracted you to start kind of importing some of these into your work?
Well, I think as a writer, I did not want to rewrite Cacciato, won the National Book Award. Why rewrite it? The things they carried. I'm not going to rewrite my own work and repeat myself.
The other things they carried.
Yeah. There's the sequel. And then you go the other. I suppose I could have done that, but I would not have lived with myself. There's a thing of, a writer wants to stretch his muscles and move in different directions. It's sort of like if you're, like Joe Montana and some of these quarterbacks. So Tom Brady is like a scratch golfer. Like he's stretched his muscles in another way, and that's how I feel as a writer, that he tried another sport and got really good at it. I wanted to write something just purely entertaining on one level, just a good, funny, entertaining story, and see if I could carry it off and then wrap it around a serious subject, the subject of deceit and fantasy, its strengths and its weaknesses, its virtues and its evils, but still keeping it entertaining along the way. I'd never written a book with the purpose of entertaining before. And I have to tell you, there was a perverse kind of fun in it. perverse because my sense of humor is not everybody's. It's got a nasty old man Mark Twain edge to it. That it's kind of a curmudgeonly 77-year-old where I find things funny now that my wife just gasps at, that literally lets out a breath of air. But to me, funny. So it was stretching my writerly muscles and moving away from one tone of telling stories into another tone.
If you were trying to entertain, does that mean that you had a particular kind of reader in mind when you were writing?
Have what?
A particular reader in mind?
Yeah, a guy kind of like me.
Right.
Maybe I could like increase sales by cloning myself as some magic drug and just, but yeah, a guy sort of like me.
Cool. When approaching the project of writing a novel, has your process changed in over this, 20-year gap that you had? Did you notice yourself sort of approaching the project differently in terms of
The process stays pretty much the same for me. I mean, every sentence I labor over and try to make fresh and good. You have to have a kind of, I don't plot my books. The stories come out of what Angie Bing says to Boyd Halverson and what he says in return. And that propels me into the next page or the next paragraph. I listen to the characters and I sort of feel that I'm following them as much as inventing for them. I think any novelist and probably any poet, certainly any musician who's composing music would say kind of the same thing. You don't plan a symphony. It grows as an organism, and you hear things early that you pick up on earlier, later, rhythms and harmonics and all the rest. And the same thing with writing the story. I didn't know the last line of the book until I'd written the line, nor did I know the first page of the book until it had written itself. I did not know that the book would start with my main character becoming a J.C. Penney's store manager in a tiny town in Northern California. One day, on page 1, leaves his Kiwanis Club meeting. It's like Elks Club or, Lions. Crosses the street and tells the teller, "I'm robbing you. Give me all your money." I didn't know he was going to rob a bank. He just seemed to do it. The only clue was he said he was fed up with rayon and just couldn't stand any more synthetic, so I got to do something new. And that was the only clue. So what does a person do if he's fed up with rayon? What the hell, rob a bank? And she asked him, "Why have you done this?" She says at one point, "You've got more money in the bank, in your bank account than you've stolen. So it wasn't money. Why rob it?" And he gives two answers. One is he said, "Well, entertainment. I needed entertainment. This is a boring town, and selling blouses and sweaters is not exactly my idea of fun." And then she asks again, like, "Be serious." And he says something that I say to myself sometimes, and I bet you do. It was a way to make himself move. He's in a static environment in a life that a broken-hearted guy has been divorced and fired from his job. He's in disgrace as an ex-journalist, and he's been for 10 years, selling rayon. And he's trying to make himself move out of that stultified life. And I have to tell myself that a lot. Get up, out of this chair, turn off the computer, and move into life. Go do something with, friends or my kids or whatever. So,
have you ever made a very drastic decision for similar reasons?
Yeah, I have, but I'm not going to talk about it. I have, yeah.
It's the kids, right? That's what we're
It
talking
ended kind of the way, it ended in sort of a catastrophe. It doesn't in this book exactly.
A lot of people die in this book, you know. There's a lot of okay, a lot of bodies in this book. You don't want to tell them. You're not going to tell us. All right, fine. You said that this will be your final novel, or you said that even tonight. So you'll have to forgive the somewhat elegiac tone of these final questions, but you've brought it on yourself. If you could go back and give advice to yourself as a young writer, what would it be?
Take up woodworking. I don't really know what, but it wouldn't be become a writer.
That's great. That's good
There
advice.
is, I mean, I'm not being completely honest with that. I'm being partially honest. There is, as I'm sure you know, there's a certain endorphin rush that comes with a page well made, or a paragraph, or a bit of dialogue that hits a whole bunch of different nerves, sort of the tear nerve and the funny nerve simultaneously. You get a rush that's sort of like, well, they'll love that in Dubuque, Iowa. Some librarian's going to like it, or in, you know, somebody in Toronto will get a hit from that. And then it's back to the drudgery of making the next sentence. But every now and then there is that satisfaction of that's right. That's how it should be said. And that's going to do something to somebody's heart, or tear ducts or laugh ducts.
And this will be my last question before we turn to some questions from the audience, but is there something that you always wanted to put in a novel but never found a way?
Yeah. I've never done. My childhood is so vivid for me. It's more vivid than the last 50 years of my life. Sort of the older I get, the more of my childhood becomes important to me. And I've never been able to express adequately the feel that my father never loved me. And it's my sister and my brother kind of agree with this. They say, he never really seemed to like you very much, and certainly didn't treat you that way. And but I haven't been able to write about it. Not because there's any psychological block, but you have to have it in a story. It can't be just father doesn't like son. It has to have a story with it. And then recently I read Turgenev wrote a thing called First Love, a novel. I read it maybe 7 months ago. It's about a kid who falls madly in love with a young woman, and his father tries to push him away from the woman. Well, in the course of the novel, you discover that his father is having an affair with this young woman that the son is in love with. And it felt like Turgenev already kind of did my book. I mean, I couldn't write it better than this, great Russian writer. So I don't think I'll ever be doing that because Turgenev did it so well.
Do you feel okay about it going unspoken in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I spoke it here, so at least Toronto knows.
We know.